right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexel, coming to you with another This Legal Life, where I get the chance to sit down and talk to people all about their legal life. Today, I'm sitting down with David Wood. David is a former senior partner at many prestigious law firms, but today he is the founder and chief principal at David Wood Consulting. David, welcome to This Legal Life.
Good afternoon, Ben. Nice to be with you.
It's great to be with you as well. So we are going to talk about, of course, your legal life, everything that you've learned over the course of the last, let's see, my math, 1999. So that's about 25 years of
Actually, it's
practicing.
1985 is
1985.
when I
Got it.
was admitted. And you when you said I had been with many firms, I'm really blessed that it's only been four.
Yeah,
And I
exactly. So
started
we
my first 9 years. Then I had my own firm for a while. I sold that to a New York insurance recovery boutique. That was my practice area, insurance recovery. And then I retired from Barnes and Thornburg, which is a big Indianapolis-based firm. So that's what brings me to my life as a consultant.
absolutely. So we're going to get into that entire journey. But on top of that, we're going to go deep a little bit on succession planning as well. And I know that you're passionate about this topic. I've met you before we started recording, and we just had like an hour conversation about succession planning, the ins and out of it. I learned more than I ever needed to, but it's such a salient topic, and for many reasons, including the generational shift, the inherent nature of firms today, the growing millennial class that is also sort of coming in. So it's multidimensional. But yeah, why don't we start sort of with the beginning, of course, and let's go back to 1985. This is a nice cut into the 80s. I wish we had some 80s cue music. And you
Don't
know,
ask me to sing.
Oh, we won't. We won't. It's maybe a little bit of Take Back or a little bit Madonna. I just watched the Deadpool movie. That was there was an
There you
incredible
go.
Madonna take in there. That was very good. So why don't we go back to 1985, and I want to ask you an interesting question. In 1985, as you enter sort of the practice, you're practicing in California. What did you know about succession planning back there, and how were you thinking about it at that point in time?
I was so focused on trying to learn how to be a lawyer
Hmm.
that the idea of succession occurred to me only in the most embryonic way. What I remember is looking. I mean, I was really blessed that I fell in during law school. Actually, I was a summer associate at what was then considered a big firm in San Francisco, and I fell in with a group of lawyers that were sorting out the insurance aspects of the collapse of the S&L industry. So and that was
Right.
fascinating. I got a really fast education, and I actually stopped going to most of my classes my third year and just sort of went to work put on a suit. Back then we put on suits,
Right.
and went to work every day doing that. But I remember, looking at the senior partners, the people in their 60s, and they were like gods. First of all, they were
Yeah.
all men.
Yeah.
There was one female partner, and many men, male senior partners. But I remember thinking, what are those guys going to do when they decide to retire? I mean, I assume they're just going to go play golf until, their wives would get tired of having them underfoot at home. And that's about as far as I got. I
Yeah.
was mentored by a couple of lawyers at that firm who were, very generous with their time. I'll always be grateful to them. They taught me how to be a lawyer. And I used to send them one of them's deceased, and the other is very old. But I used to send them thank you notes every 3 or 4 years when I was in practice, just thanking them for helping make me a good lawyer. Actually, it's more than help; they made me a good lawyer. So
Mm.
you know, it's a what every law firm, in order to be sustainable, has
Mm.
to replace those people in their 60s. Those people who are the big producers. Um, People in their late 50s to late 60s, early 70s tend to be the disproportionately greater of the producers in a law firm, and they tend to own disproportionately more of the equity in law firms. So they're the people who, if you don't replace, your firm's just going to go up in smoke.
Mm,
Every law firm is a machine. It's a billable hours generating machine. And if the firm can't replace those, that machine each generation, then it goes the way of the dodo. Now,
mm,
traditionally, during my lifetime, during my career, the practice of law or outside law firms, successful outside law firms, like the firm I started with,
mm,
the firm that I started, successful law firms, succession was just bringing people up through the ranks, and occasionally you hired in a lateral for some strategic reason, but there was never any question that there was going to be enough talent to plug in when needed. But I never thought, particularly when I had my own firm, I never thought about what would happen if I became unavailable for
mm,
any reason. If I became disabled one day for 3 or 4 months, who was going to step in and take over my matters? And frankly, there wasn't anybody. I mean, I had a very capable, co-equal partner when I had my own firm, but he had his own practice. He couldn't
right.
step in and run mine. So the idea of succession started to occur to me sort of around that time in my life,
Mm,
maybe 15 or so years ago. And that's when I started to think, I've had some terrific people work for me, but I've got to start structuring my team so that, we sit down, we talk about what's going to happen when I retire 15 years from now.
mm,
And it
right.
was literally that far out. And the my junior partner, who ended up inheriting maybe half of my $6 million practice, one of the most talented lawyers I've ever known, a guy named Josh Rosenberg. I started grooming him to succeed me basically right out of law school. He went to Pepperdine out of law school.
Mm,
So, and then along the way, acquired other folks who were working on my cases with me.
mm,
And the good ones obviously rose to the top of the heap, like, cream on a bottle of milk. And
mm,
those were the folks who ended up being my successors.
yeah. Yeah.
Succession was not completely organic, because I had a couple of clients where I didn't have someone with enough experience in the subject matter expertise to step in, from my pool of talent at Barnes and Thornburg. So we made a lateral acquisition that was, very
Mm,
strategic, and she has done an awesome job in working with those two clients.
mm,
So that's kind of the story of me and succession. The only thing I would add, Ben, is the last 2 years of my career, my firm created this, really very intelligently, thoughtfully create an environment for me in which to do client transitions, to actually execute the formula for
mm,
migrating my practice to these successors. So I got interested in being a consultant to, help law firms, help
mm,
partners do that process during that last 2 years.
yeah. Okay. I started the podcast with this question because what I'm hoping we can explore is basically how taking from a junior lawyer to managing your own firm to moving to a mid-sized firm to moving to a large firm. I'm interested in the evolution of how succession planning in your life has sort of gone. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to sort of see what you've learned, see what you've picked up. And then we're going to end with sort of the consulting that you're doing today. So you've kind of give us the trailer, but now let's watch the full length movie if that makes sense.
Well, interestingly, a choosing choosing a successor. It's sort of like, I've been with, in love with the same woman for 40 years. We
Mm,
were law school sweethearts, and we marvel sometimes at how lucky we were to be, to run across each other at just the
mm,
right time and just the right place, where we were just, both of us ready to change our, sort of move on to that stage in our life where we wanted to be in
sure.
a primary relationship. And that's kind of, you got to do that with successors too.
Mm,
So I
okay.
was mentored by a couple of guys who really taught me to be a lawyer, and they had, a book of business together that um, I could have inherited had I stayed there,
Mhm.
but stay at that firm. But, at that point, they were in their, late 30s and to late 40s. They weren't anywhere near retiring. So I would have had to have waited another 30 years, 20 years, 25 years. And I was just not going to do that. I mean, by the time I was a third year associate, I was pretty much keeping myself busy with my own clients.
Mhm.
I was
Right.
really, really fortunate to have, opportunities that led to client relationships very, very early in
Mhm.
my career. So, um, and I've had the same experience. I've
Mhm.
trained many, many lawyers, some who were very, very talented, who moved on because they were not going, I wasn't at a point in my life where I could promise them, to transition my clients to them anytime soon. And they were talented enough to, have their own business, and they just found better opportunities at other firms with lawyers who were closer to retirement. And I get that, that's just sort of the way it happens. But the people who ended up succeeding to my book of business when I retired
Mhm.
were folks who were we just sort of wandered it. No, it was more deliberate than that. We didn't wander into each other's orbit. We came into each other's orbit at exactly the
Yes.
right time. But that was a very deliberate process.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when I had my own firm, it was about it was succession really was just about training people, training lawyers who were, who had the requisite skills and were willing to undergo the very rigorous David Wood approach to practice.
Mhm.
And I feel tremendous pride in
Mhm.
some of the lawyers that have gone on to be very, very successful people, very good lawyers, and I'm so proud of them. I hesitate to say that because they're very mature older lawyers now. I
Sure.
don't want to
Sure.
sound patronizing in any way because they were just super talented. But
Mhm.
when I had my own firm, succession really was about making sure that there were people there, who were talented enough to step in temporarily if I, got rear-ended and had to spend a few weeks in hospital,
Mhm.
that so succession at that point, I mean, really
Yeah.
succession is not just retirement. Succession is the
Exactly.
process
Right.
of
Yes. Right.
creating service continuity for a
Mhm.
client no matter what happens to the relationship partner. Sometimes it's the person dies, God forbid, or becomes disabled or has some horrible life event that makes that person unavailable for some
Mhm.
short time period of time. Other times it's and I was just talking to a former client of mine the other day who's the general counsel of a large bank that you would know,
Mhm.
and I've been calling my old clients very strategically, because I want
Mhm.
to ask them what their experience is with law firms that don't do succession very, very, very well. She told me
Mhm.
this horror story of being ghosted by one of her outside lawyers who had
Mhm.
moved laterally and just stopped taking her calls, and she couldn't understand where it got. I said, what happened is he moved to a firm that had a conflict with your bank.
Right.
Instead of coming to you and saying, "I'm sorry, I need to introduce you to somebody at my old firm," he just
Mhm.
ghosted you because the firm said, "Yes, we'd like to have you, but we don't want your bank your bank client."
Right.
So succession is not just about what happens when, the relationship partner retires. It also happens as a protective measure and as a proactive planning measure at any
Mhm.
time in the relationship partner's career. So when I was a young relationship partner, it meant having younger partners,
Right.
ready to step in and sort of pull the laboring oar,
Mhm.
if I was if I was unavailable for any reason. And fast forward, to Barnes and Thornburg. I know I shared this with you recently. Um, I had a succession of event just 6 weeks after, excuse me, 6 months after I joined Barnes and Thornburg.
Mhm.
And, at that time, I've been practicing for 30 years. And, I was a very senior partner. And I had this horrific personal tragedy. One of
Mhm.
my children died. And all of a sudden, succession became very, very important to me. Although I didn't use that word in my own head, it was
Mm,
like my functionality just dropped all of a sudden
mm,
for about a year. I mean, it was the worst was the first 3 or 4 months, but that first year was like the worst year of my life. Thank goodness I had a very, very capable team of people who I had brought with me to
mm,
Barnes and Thornburg, and people at Barnes and Thornburg who also chipped in and pitched in to help me when I was not at 100%. That's why we have to start planning for succession the moment we have our own clients, because if something happens and we're not available, and life throws wild pitches at you sometimes, and
mm,
sometimes those are planned, and sometimes they just come out of the blue like tragedies do.
mm,
But succession is what we must do if we're
mm,
going to give our clients that warm, fuzzy feeling we want them to have, that, okay, whatever it is that I'm handling for them, they can cross that off of the list of things to worry about.
mm. I I hear you going back a little bit about timing, and something that I just heard is sort of timing, and in a way, finding succession partners, you spoke about that, but also just timing that life throws you some curveballs. And so I hear a lot of succession about what I've heard you just say is succession is also about getting prepared and rethinking around the idea of preparedness for continued client service delivery, and the importance of that. And I think that that's what I'm getting my head around, just hearing sort of your story about how you've evolved your own idea over the course of the 30 something years that you were practicing, how you changed sort of your idea of succession planning. Can I ask, within there, just to double click a little bit more around the idea of moving into firms and the importance of succession vis-a-vis lateral partners. Now, you went from your own firm, which went into Anderson Kill, then against into Barnes and Thornburg. How did you think about, what were you learning about succession within the context of moving into different firms and different environments? Because that, of course, changes the situation, even if you just think about it as continuous service delivery. Does that question make sense? It's,
It does. It's
I'm
a
just
really good
trying to
question.
expand outside of
Fortunately,
the
I didn't
typical,
have to.
you
Yeah,
know.
fortunately, I didn't have to deal with that really, because
Right,
your question is a really good one.
right,
If I had been Well, so I was an insurance recovery lawyer. I went to Anderson Kill, which is a terrific insurance recovery firm based in New York. And so when I moved there, um, they just did well. Their primary practice was what I did,
right.
so it was really easy to sort of blend my practice in with theirs. And my firm was Anderson Kill Wood and Bender, which is their West Coast office, until the firm was rebranded as Anderson Kill.
Mm,
um, and then when I moved to Barnes and Thornburg, the very first thing I had to make sure was that they never represented insurance companies, so I didn't have conflicts.
sure.
So succession, the first question about succession is to make sure that I'm on a platform
Mm,
that can deliver the service that my clients need. Because if I'm on a platform where the guy in the Pittsburgh office has a $20 million book of business with AIG, then I know the next time I go to sue AIG, the managing partner of the firm might call me up and say, "Hey, look, you got to back off."
mm,
So I could never ever join a firm where that was a possibility. So the continuity of service that I, provided my clients as I moved from Anderson Kill to Barnes and Thornburg was all about making sure that there were going to be no conflicts, so that it was seamless. And that's really what succession is all about. No matter what stage of life the lawyer
right,
is,
right.
relationship partners it is in, is to make sure that there are no bumps, there are no service interruptions, there are no conflicts, no obstacles to providing service continuity. It used to be that succession was automatic. When I was admitted in 1985, big firms still had institutional clients.
Mm.
that had been, their client for generations. And
Right.
so, they did work for General Motors, and there was always a big team of lawyers serving General Motors. And there were lawyers at the bottom of that team, and there were lawyers at the top of the team, and everything in between. And as long as the service excellence was maintained, then those, lower rungs moved up the ladder. They were promoted within the firm. They were promoted to, new relationships with people at also ascending within the law departments of, a company like General Motors, so that when the relationship partner retired, it was just a natural progression for the second in command to step into the leadership role. And that's just sort of the way it was. There was very little lateral movement between
Mm.
firms. So succession was not a challenge back then
Right.
the way it is
Right.
now. In the late 80s, early 90s, the what we now treat as really the status quo, which is constant lateral movement,
Mm.
started to kind of take off. It really wasn't until another 10 or 20 years when, it really got to where it is now, where it literally happens each and every day. I subscribe to law.com every
Sure.
single day. There are
Yeah.
there are there are articles and notes about, lawyers, practice groups moving, and the
Mm.
problems and opportunities that creates for the firms they leave, for the firms they go to. But before all that happened, succession was nowhere near as much of an issue.
Sure.
Once lawyers with big books of business started to move laterally, those client relationships got stickier with the relationship partner. It used to be that general counsels hired law firms. Now they really don't hire law firms. Well, I mean, I'm just saying most general counsels don't hire most law firms. They hire lawyers, and that
Mm.
lawyer is presumed to have the talent underneath that lawyer, underneath that leader of the service team, to service that business. And I had a number of clients that I could not do all the work myself. I had to have other people who were very,
Mm.
very good. And without them, I wouldn't have been able to provide the service that the client needed. So so the stickiness was really between me and the client.
Right.
The succession process for me in, migrating my practice very deliberately to my successors ahead of my retirement was about transferring that stickiness to them,
Yeah.
so that because there's very little stickiness with firms compared to the way it was when I started
Mm.
practice,
Mm.
and it's sort of reintroducing that stickiness so that it doesn't just attach to me.
Yes. Right.
Um, one thing that when as I mentioned to you, and we were talking before we began, that I've been calling general counsels at the companies I used to represent, my former clients, because I want to talk to them about their experience with succession. But I'm very, very careful about that. I
Mm.
don't make calls to any of those people without first calling my successors, my former partners at Barnes and Thornburg, and asking if that's okay, because a very, very important part of succession is, for me, becoming the invisible man.
Right.
And
Right.
that was not, and when I say that, I don't want to ever do anything that reminds a client that I have,
Mm.
in that last 2 years of my practice, my objective when I went to work each and every day was to transfer that stickiness between me and the client to my successor and the client. And that meant me sort of moving out of the picture, out of the line of sight from the client, and coaching
Mm.
from the sidelines,
Mm.
where I was not visible to the client, where I'm not billing any time, but where I'm doing that all important coaching uh, and training of the successor through each and every decision that goes on.
Mm.
And it sounds exhaustive, but it's like that's how you do it.
Mm.
That's how the nuances of the relationship get transferred. It's when I got to that point where I'm out of the camera as far as the client is concerned. So the last thing I ever wanted to do was to remind the
Mm.
client that I exist. What I really want to do is keep the focus on the successor. But once that bonding really happened, then I could call my partner and say, "You mind if I call so and so at such and such a client?" And I'm just calling to make sure that that relationship is as strong as it was when I left. And of course, they all said yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I take great pride in, because they're doing an awesome job for these clients. And that's, they're doing everything I ever expected of them and more.
Hmm.
But your question about, sort of where succession started having an impact on me,
Hmm.
it really was about backup before it was about client migration.
Hmm. Yeah. Let me for the sake of time, you're so gracious with your time, and of course I don't have you. I wish we could talk for about 3.5 hours. I've decided that I'm a whole succession nerd now that you've placed such a big frame in it. Let's go to, we sort of hopefully walk through the evolution of your idea around succession planning. We double clicked a little bit as you moved laterally and your particular circumstance. I want to go into the last 2 years because I kind of feel like the last 2 years at Barnes and Thornburg was when it started to get systematic. And there's some, you've talked to me about some very particular things that you were doing. You're already starting to hint at it, being the invisible man, evaporating, a bunch of great metaphors. You can just imagine yourself sort of like with a hat and like just kind of evaporating and kind of being a
Right.
present. But talk to me a little bit. Let's get some detail around there, around what does that look like? What role were you taking? What was your mindset kind of at the time? It takes a lot to sort of remove yourself from 30 years of being the point person to sort of stepping back. That's a whole other change. And then save some time because then I want to go to a couple of the issues that might, a couple of the roadblocks that tend to get in the way of good succession planning, and then also why it's kind of imperative right now. I think that there's a shift, right? And we've talked about this in
Yes.
terms of generational, et cetera. So just save some time there. We want to get to those roadblocks and how you can lift them. But take us to the last 2 years. How did you start to think about this? How did you start to evaporate?
So what I did was I sat down and I devised a template for a succession plan for each of my major corporate clients. And I plugged in, a successor or a team of successors. But then I actually wrote a plan that, I proactively took to the client and said, and oftentimes actually that taking to the client was not a single event. It was a continuum because I had already plugged my successors into leadership roles. I just needed to start getting the client acclimated to the fact that that leadership role was going to take on new importance as my retirement date, came on. So it was about preparing that plan on a template that I devised, taking it to the client, telling the client I'm going to retire on such and such a date, and to say here's what's going to happen between now and then.
Oh,
Um, there were only a few instances where I was introducing a new person into the relationship. The lateral partner that we brought in from
right.
Reed Smith, the lead Asadorian, who did an awesome job with a couple
Mm,
of my clients, was new to some of them. She was, such a great lawyer and had very, was very, very experienced. So it was easy to plug her in. But it's really important to go to the client and say, here's the successor, here are the successors, and here's my plan to get you the service continuity that you want
mm,
when I'm gone, because I'm going to be gone in 2 years.
mm,
And here's what I propose that we do. Now, getting the client's buy-in obviously is super important. And my clients, and I don't think this is unusual, my clients really appreciated my having,
mm,
really talented lawyers at my shoulders, ready that they knew already and that they were learning to trust or had already come to trust and have confidence in. They really appreciated that, it wasn't it had never been just me. So they
mm,
knew they were hiring a team. They knew that when, the number one guy on the team left, the number two stepped into the number one position. They were all, they all wanted to have the benefit of that 2 years to complete that number two to number one transition. But
mhm,
they did the one thing that clients must do, and this is something that we as relationship partners really have to. I mean, this is absolutely the most important thing in that initial phase of a practice migration. and that is to ask the client and have the client do essentially a suspension of disbelief, because none of my successors have had as much experience as I did. I had 38 years when I retired. Um, they were all smart, subject area experts, but they
Mm.
weren't as experienced as I was. And the
Mm.
clients had to suspend disbelief and
Right.
accept, my successors as reasonable substitutes for me. And that meant accepting them in their slightly less experienced
Mm.
condition as a suitable replacement for me. And that was a leap of faith that we
Mm.
ask our clients to make. All of my clients made it. That I think if we asked them, they would say we felt like, and some of my clients were so kind. I mean, said, look, you're
Mm.
the gold standard in succession. I've never seen anybody do it this well
Mm.
before. So that's what I replicate in my consulting practice.
Mm.
On the issue of what the obstacles are to doing it. So
Yeah.
anyway, there was a formula that took basically 2 years to do. The big
Hmm.
obstacles at most firms are compensation based.
Right.
So many firms have compensation systems that disincentivize partners from even telling their firms when they're going to retire, because sometimes firms, when they learn a lawyer's going to retire, um, will penalize that partner
Mm.
by reducing compensation unreasonably, just because they know that that partner is going to leave and not go to another firm. It's going
Right.
to leave and do something other than being a lawyer, and not going to another firm and compete with them. So they can get away with paying less, and the partner's going to
Mm.
leave angry, but the partner's still going to leave, and the firm will save some money. You'd be amazed at how often that happens. And
Mm.
that's just a breach of culture. If you've got a culture in which that kind of thing that can happen,
Mm.
succession is going to be a very hard thing to master,
Mm.
because if there isn't trust between the management of the law firm and the retiring partner, then those compensation issues are going to be insurmountable.
Mm.
A big one is, what happens in a firm that has, like most firms do, has a 1 year comp cycle. So if I take 2 years, last 2 years of my career, to execute that practice migration, and I put those hundreds of hours of non-billable time it took to make that happen, and I bill fewer hours than I would have otherwise in that year one of that 2 year transition period. Then in year two, if the firm doesn't protect my compensation drops,
Mm.
because I've done the client migration work for the benefit of my successors and the benefit of my firm. And if I get penalized for that, I really can't reasonably be expected to do that work.
Mm.
I was really blessed to be at a firm, Barnes and Thornburg, where my compensation was fully protected.
Mm.
So I had and actually I had a strong personal
Mm.
reason for wanting to leave Barnes and Thornburg a little better than it was when I came to it, and that was after my child died. I'd only been there 6 months, and I didn't know anybody. They didn't know me, and yet the outpouring of love and support from partners I'd never met, from support staff and far-flung offices I'd never visited, people I
Mm.
still haven't met, was just overwhelming. And they, although my practice contracted that first year, they didn't cut my compensation. They hired me a therapist without asking. I mean, I could go on and on. I choke up thinking about it, frankly, because you really find out a lot about people when you see what they do when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
And they really supported me through the worst experience of my life. So for me, succession became an act of gratitude.
Mm.
And the comp issues that are obstacles to succession,
Yeah.
what I do now as a consultant is help depress the it helps shine a light on those things, so firms understand and can make a very deliberate choice in their strategic planning about whether they're going to overcome those comp issues so that they
Mm.
retain retiring partners practices, or they're not.
Yeah.
And if they
Yeah.
don't, then and this goes to the last question that you asked, what's going to happen? Why isn't the time honored tradition of just bringing people up through the firm organically, why isn't that going to do it?
Mm.
it's, the fact is that there are way, way more of me, my generation, than there
Mm,
are of yours.
mm,
So, and there's a lot going on too, other than just demographics. A
mm,
lot of, I mean, I always heard when I was an associate, about, it, it it was really when the conversation started back in the 80s about lifestyle. What do you want as a
mm,
lifestyle? Do you really want to be
mm,
putting the kind of time it takes to become an equity partner at a big law firm? And there were some people who just made that decision not to do that,
mm,
but that is totally changed now.
mm,
Younger lawyers are less interested in becoming, I mean, research being done by the ACC, by Thomson Reuters,
mm,
it is shining a light really on what general counsels of big companies are seeing in the lawyers who are serving them, and what they think needs to be improved. And a lot of things that need to be improved are traceable, I think, to a shortage of lawyers who really, really understand what their clients want and need, and are skilled in being able to communicate those,
mm,
a response to those needs. And as the next generation of Gen Xers, of millennials, have to replace the baby boom generation, there's going to be a smaller talent pool because not as many lawyers want to be big firm equity partners. How do we know that? Look at all the parallel tracks that there
mm,
are at big firms.
right.
Most firms now have at least a two track partnership system, non-capital and a capital partner. Many firms have other tracks of counsel, special counsel, senior counsel. The reason for that is that it's not because the firms think that's a good idea. It's because there's a demand by the lawyers coming up through
Mm,
the ranks to be something other than what I was, a senior equity partner at a big firm.
mm,
There's also a lot of demographic uh, research that tells us that people don't want to go into the legal field, and the ones that do use their law degrees to do a lot of use their law degrees to do something else. They go into executive leadership of companies where their law degree helps, but it's their business experience that really is what makes a living for them.
mm,
So there's the time is coming fast
sure.
where recruiting is going to be a really, really big challenge. Clients are also that they are pushing back. They do not like something that the baby boom generation has introduced in their lives, which is just disappearing one day,
Mm,
retiring without notice. I just hear horror story after horror story, and the reason for that is that their firms aren't structured. Many firms aren't structured to make retirement an event, a milestone, a rite of passage that is both an opportunity to retain the retiring partner's clients and also a marketing opportunity to strengthen and broaden those client relationships. Firms that just sort of, and this is the way most firms do succession, is that they just are okay with the obstacles to succession are so
mm,
intractable that
right.
it's easier to let those clients go than to solve the problems that create the obstacles to keeping those clients.
Mm,
And that's where I guess the my ultimate warning to the profession is that if you don't keep those clients of retiring partners, and your clients rebel as they're beginning to, and saying,
mm,
we want to know who your successors are because we want to know that if you are relationship partners unavailable for any reason, including retirement, we know who's there to give us the service continuity we expect from you.
mm,
And if clients demand that, law firms that don't provide it are going to be competing for that ever shrinking pool of clients that are willing to hire law firms without demanding designation of successors.
yeah.
And think about what those clients, retiring partners clients, if they get away, that's a hole in a balance sheet that
Sure.
everybody else has to backfill before they start making more money.
Sure.
So
Sure.
they're not making any more money on doing that backfilling. They're going out and getting new clients, new matters to fill that hole in revenue left by the retiring partners' clients. Nobody's making any more money. They're just keeping profits where they are. They're treading water.
Yep.
And at some
Yep.
point, the rising stars, the people who we want to, who are the replacements for my generation, who are going to
mm,
keep the law firm, growing into the future,
mm,
they're just not going to put up with it. They're
right.
going to go to a firm that systematically does what I help firms do, which
Yeah.
is to
Yeah.
retain retirement partners' clients.
Yeah. So let's we're gonna wrap up here. That was a tour de force in terms of the why. It's my goodness, it's challenging, but somebody smart once told me the opportunity is there's a bunch of people who will never care. There's a bunch of some other people who care a whole lot, and then there's the middle, and that's where the juice is, right? And the opportunity. That person was you. You're smiling. You can't see it on the on the podcast, but that's a quote that I took from you. I let's go into consulting and sort of I don't like to say the second half of life. I like to think that everything sort of plays together in a sense. But you're now running your own shop. You're sort of leading, but leading and carrying this flag in a sense. What's been on the other side of life for you in that way, playing a different instrument and thinking about things in a different side, in some sense, just on the outside in a way, It's maybe if we want to quote Pacino in the third Godfather, I try to get out, but they pull me back in, kind of thing. But I'll digress before we get into the Godfather quotes. What's it been like?
Well, there's kind of two answers for that. One is to go back to, I mean, succession turned out to be a very emotional experience for me. I never saw that kind of. I
Hmm,
mean, I just thought it was going to be business, just the last chapter of my
sure.
business life. But it ended up being um, a source. I mean, the work that I put into it was some of the most satisfying work I did in the
Hmm,
38 years
yeah.
that I practiced. I was a practicing lawyer because I really felt like my legacy was that my firm retained my entire book of business. I feel
Hmm,
tremendous pride in my successor partners who helped me pull that off. And I feel, very good that my clients, they're now their clients, are being so well served. And, as I said, that was really an act of gratitude to my firm, an act of gratitude to my successor partners, because I would never have been able to retire in the manner that I have had I not built personal wealth on, their excellent services to my clients. They made me a lot of money.
hmm,
And in the succession process, I got to reciprocate. They now, they have gone to a whole new level of success within Barnes and Thornburg because they've taken my clients and they're super talented. So they're going out and getting their own clients. These people who I brought up through the ranks through that last 2 years of client transitions, they are now very, very successful, making a lot of money, and they deserve every single penny.
hmm,
The other part of it is I'm an avid surfer, and I now sort of divide my time between California and Canada, where I am now, and
hmm,
far flung locations around the world where I go surfing. And my firm, this is actually very controversial in the legal industry, is mandatory retirement. My firm had a mandatory retirement age of 67, which I am now,
hmm,
with a 3-year option to extend if I could demonstrate that staying was going to be good for the firm, that I would add to profitability, not detract from it. And I could have stayed for another 3 years, but that would have not only, I mean, I wanted to have that 3 years to, of health and activity and
hmm,
functionality to go surfing. But also, I had always promised my successor partners that I was going to leave at 67. And
yeah.
if I had stayed, that success, that wealth that they have inherited, they would have had to wait another 3 years for that. And that would have been a breach of my agreement with them.
Hmm,
Obviously, if I lost all my assets to a Ponzi scheme, I just had to stay in practice, that would be one thing. But
hmm,
it was really incumbent upon me, and I was delighted to be in a position to honor that agreement
hmm,
so that they really have, they've really taken their careers have really taken off, and they so deserve it.
hmm. David, I think we're gonna wrap up here. I think this was an enlightening conversation. I really appreciate how we sort of reformulated the idea of succession, how you shared some of your personal stories about, where was this getting driven from? And then also, not backing away from some of the issues, some of the cultural issues, the compensation issues that hold this back. We'll have to have you back, of course, to discuss an updating of what's going on. Of course, we have this epic battle coming to our doorsteps, and it's gonna be promise, but also maybe a little bit pain, but inevitably some change. It's going to be really interesting. So thank you so much for sitting down on the podcast today.
Thanks for inviting me, Ben. Always good to see you.
Always good to see you. And it's always good to hear from you all. So if you are listening to this podcast, please like, subscribe, let us know. I personally look into the analytics. It's crazy to see how many people from around the world listen to the podcast. It's absolutely mind-boggling, but maybe not that much because there's a lot of lawyers around the world, and there's probably a lot of lawyers thinking about what they're going to do next. So if you found this podcast helpful, please like, subscribe, all of that. Let the let the power of the algorithms let us know what's up. And that's it. We will be back very, very soon with another This Legal Life. Thank you so much, everybody, and take care. Bye bye.